Next, from Springfield, we attend a press conference with representatives of the Illinois Retailers, the Illinois Municipal League, and the Illinois Sheriff's Association as they explain their opposition to increasing the retail theft felony threshold. This runs about 15 minutes.
I'm joined today by Greg Sullivan, Executive Director of the Illinois Sheriff's Association, and Patrick Hayes, General Counsel of the Illinois Municipal League. Not exactly three groups that you usually see aligned on a particular issue, but we find ourselves with common ground today. There are a number of proposals before the Assembly seeking to increase the felony threshold for retail theft from the existing $300 to as high as $2,500. At $2,500, that would put us highest in the country, tied, I believe, with Texas, but certainly tied for highest in the country. I'd like to add a little perspective for you, if I could, and what that might mean for someone under the $2,000 threshold. You could repeatedly steal two 55-inch large-screen TVs, 4 laptop computers, 2 iPhones, and 58 pairs of jeans, and never be charged with a felony under that threshold. You could steal enough pseudoephedrine to make 1.5 pounds of meth with a street value of over $30,000. There's a few myths, I think, that are driving this. First, stealing for need. I think you've been provided a list of the most commonly stolen items as reported to us by the National Association for Shoplifting Prevention and the National Retail Federation. You will see on there baby formula. Let me address that head on. Baby formula is almost always stolen to cut drugs, primarily heroin and cocaine, and for shipment to Asia. You'll also notice things like 57 boxes of Claret you could steal, Coach handbags, Tide bottles, GPS devices, and weight loss pills. Hardly stealing for need. Additionally, 80% or more of the shoplifters who are detained in stores have on them the money they would have needed to purchase the item which they were attempting to steal. Again, hardly stealing for need. Another myth is that jails are crowded with people sitting in jail for the first offense. Number one, as of January 1st in Illinois, that shouldn't be the case. IRMA was proud to partner with the Cook County Sheriff Dart's office to pass support, and the Assembly enacted and the Governor signed into law the I-bond. So as of January 1st, no one should be sitting in jail for a misdemeanor offense for retail theft. Furthermore, the stats cited by advocates do two things. First, they cite larceny. Larceny is a catch-all that includes retail theft. You have to drill down in that number. Second, most of the people that are sitting in jails for retail theft are not there simply for retail theft. They are there for violation of parole that included retail theft or other charges such as other robberies or fraud. The Sentencing Policy Advisory Council's own numbers from a few years ago demonstrate that the average retail thief in jail today has 7 felony arrests and 18 misdemeanor arrests prior to being arrested for shoplifting. Hardly someone sitting in jail for a first offense. And I think it's important to note, according to the National Association for Shoplifting Prevention, that retail thieves are caught once out of every 48 times they steal. So it is not someone typically just walking in and acting for the first time. The other myth is that shoplifting doesn't hurt anyone. Under the numbers provided to us, the estimate is that at least, absolute minimum, $2 billion in merchandise and lost sales makes its way out of Illinois retailers every year. And that impact is not just on retail. And to highlight a little bit of that, I'd like to ask Patrick Hayes from the Illinois Municipal League to say a few words. Patrick?
Thank you. That's Patrick Hayes, H-A-Y-E-S. I'm the General Counsel at the Illinois Municipal League. And our communities suffer economically with the outcome of these retail thefts. Rob mentioned that figure. That equates to $100 million of lost sales tax revenue for the state of Illinois, $25 million of local sales tax revenue for local municipalities, and more if they impose local taxes. So when you lose billions of dollars of revenue out of the retail, it dramatically impacts revenues in local municipalities. And as we all know, the funding decisions that your local municipalities have to make are very difficult. And those become incrementally more difficult when you suffer losses like this and at the scale that we're suffering from retail theft. It's our view that local leaders shouldn't be faced with additional burdens on their economic concerns and their budgeting woes if we can avoid it. We think increasing the felony threshold would do that. And we believe that the increase in that threshold would threaten the safety of our communities and the first responders and personnel that have to interdict these acts. We'll talk a little bit more about that. Mr. Carr?
Greg Sullivan from the Sheriff's Association will talk to us a little bit about the impact on law enforcement. Greg?
Thank you, Ron. Greg Sullivan, SULLIVAN. I'm the Executive Director of the Illinois Sheriff's Association. I know the Governor's Reform Commission looked at this issue, and I serve on that commission. A number of us voted against it then. I'm still opposed to it. I think it's going to impact local law enforcement. It's certainly, and I understand the need not to put low-level offenders in jail. But if you have people who are stealing to either feed their family or feed their addiction, we need to address that, not raise the limit to $2,000 so that we can have organized retail theft using those people to steal for them. And that's exactly what will happen. That's what we're seeing in other states. We're seeing increases in shoplifting in other states. And the direct impact of that is costing law enforcement money. And in the states that have gone to the highest levels, you see a mentality among law enforcement that this is strictly a misdemeanor theft. We're not going to prosecute. We're not going to arrest. And that's probably the wrong approach for making people responsible for their actions. And it should be making people responsible for their actions rather than considering what the cost is, the social cost of putting somebody in jail. And I understand that that's a problem, but we've got expungement laws to deal with those issues if we deal with the core problem of why they're shoplifting to begin with.
Thank you, Greg. So as we've seen over the past 5 years, as other states have increased their thresholds to different levels. California, one of the most recent ones, went to $950. The Los Angeles Police Department reported a 25% increase in retail theft. And the FBI stats show that nationally retail theft has increased over the same period 17%, over the last 5 years, 17%. And the value of the merchandise has increased over 30%, the value of the merchandise stolen. So clearly they know where the limits are and they proceed to steal to the limits. We'd be happy to answer any other questions you might have at this time.
The commission report contradicts what you were saying about upticks. It says that the Pew Charitable Trust did a study from 2009 to 2011 across 23 states, found no correlation between raising this threshold and increasing that.
And Greg could speak more on this if I missed something, but I think it also points to the stats they're looking at. They're looking at larceny, which I indicated earlier includes a broad range of crimes. We've narrowed it down using FBI statistics to simply retail theft. So it would not be unusual for the larceny number to show because others could go down while retail goes up.
And then what about this idea?
Did you have more?
I was at that meeting in December when I know you were one of the 4 votes against it. But there seemed to be consensus among a lot of the people that this is a crime of addiction. That these are not your master thieves who are doing this sort of thing. And even if they're not for need necessarily, but these are people who would be better served by treatment than the 8 months or whatever they're going to spend.
Well, and I will say this, as I did my research around the country with my fellow execs, and statistics are wonderful things. You can do just about anything with them. But I don't believe they're statistics. I think some of this, what we see is the ones that are coming in, yes, there's addiction problems out there. People are feeding that habit. But when they've got the money in their pocket to buy already, then this is a way of life. And it probably needs to be addressed. Again, they've done it numerous times before they're caught. And we've got to somehow get to that core of addiction and treat that in order to get to the base problem. But raising the limit is not helping them. How does that help them?
Well, I think that, I'm not on the commission, but I think what the majority on the commission decided is that by raising the limit and diverting people into local treatment programs or something like that instead of sending them to DOC.
And I'm not going to criticize the governor's appointments to the commission, but the commission was heavily weighted for advocates. And I think you would have to agree with that.
I would add 2 other things to that. First, how many of you know that there are 2 existing diversion programs in state statute? Almost no one knows that. They're hardly ever utilized. The question is why. Perhaps we need to reform the diversion programs to address the individuals that you're speaking of. So that is one significant point I think we need to make on that as well.
Does the threshold not need to be increased at all?
We would argue it does not need to be increased at all. Particularly in light of the fact that we supported and worked with the Sheriff Dart's office, the Assembly passed and the Governor enacted the legislation to make I-bonds. So as of January 1st, there should not be an issue for someone who truly has need or an indigent who's truly in a misdemeanor theft situation, not someone who's violated parole, not someone who has a list of other crimes that they've committed for sitting in jail. That just simply shouldn't happen.
Rob, let me throw out a different issue, but we can maybe tie them together. We know that retailers are under more competitive threat than they've ever been. We look around the nation, not just Illinois, and see malls being emptied out store by store. Interest rates are about to go up, which is going to put more pressure on the retailers. So tie this together. To what extent are they in the position, any of these retailers, to incur more loss via retail theft?
No, clearly not. I think you make the point very well with some of the stats you cite in your question, and it intrigues me why the answer to the problem is to simply hang a sign on a business that's making 2% on average net profit, many much less than that. Grocery stores operate very close to 0% net profit. Why it's simply okay for the state to hang a sign on that says, come take this merchandise. That seems to be counterintuitive.
Where is the legislation and how likely is it to pass?
Well, if you've been around here as longer than I have, but at some point we believe we'll see legislation come out of one or both chambers, some sort of agreement, and come back. You know, they'll work it through the process. We've been told to expect that within the next couple of weeks. But currently there are several bills that do it. House Bill 2856, I believe, is at $2,500. There's another bill, a couple bills at $2,000 threshold. Yes, sir.
Regardless of the threshold, what can retailers do to combat retail theft?
They invest tremendous amounts of resources already in combating retail theft. And it's interesting to note what they're up against. If you go online, you can find numerous websites where shoplifters are sharing information about who has what kind of procedures, what kind of theft deterrents, who will chase you, who won't. It's a cottage industry of how to steal from a retail store. So, did I answer your question? Thank you. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
You know, part of the thinking also with increasing the threshold is, you know, you got an iPhone there that's $348. That's over $300. And looking at inflation when it comes to the price of goods, does that work at all into this equation? Or
That inflation is an argument that's used on a number of fronts, right? But retailers have fight that inflation as well, right? It's not just it's in what we pay our employees; it's in everything we do. Sales, everything that makes our investments possible, come out of sales. Every sale that walks out of the store as a stolen item is something that we can't recoup our costs on. It is something the municipalities and local governments lose. It is something that law enforcement has to deal with in some way or doesn't have the resources that they need. It's interesting to note that really what this does is shift the burden to the local level. And California highlighted that. The California Assembly had to come back the year after they increased their threshold to $950 and pass a $270 million supplemental just for local governments to help them afford the cost shift. As I recall, it was increased in 2011, but I can certainly follow up and make sure that number. I believe it was 150 before it was doubled to 300. All right, thank you all very much for your time today. We appreciate it.